William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Good afternoon and welcome to the, I was going to say to the Jewish Music Hour. That was my last show, wasn't it? Welcome to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet, and I even have it written down here. See,
I'm David Taffet.
Patti and David right here. I'm David Taffet here with the late Patti Fink. The not here LaRon Landis is taking the day off because Gabrielle is back to school on Monday.
Yeah.
So he's doing all the back to school stuff with her. Our guests today are Leslie McMurray and Katie Sprinkle.
Frequent contributors to Lambda Weekly.
Frequent contributors to Lambda Weekly and to our community.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. They're going to help us with kind of a back to school show. So
let's go shopping.
LaRon should have been here just in case Gabrielle is transgender. If she is, he loses. He'll have to go elsewhere for help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, he can take notes while listening at home.
Oh, he's not going to be listening at home.
Well, they recently got
Sunday afternoon.
They got the new kitty, and I asked him on Facebook. I said, "So, what's the kitty's name and what and preferred pronouns?"
Mm-hmm.
So,
might as well ask. Can't go wrong there.
That's right.
Before we get to our guests, I do have to rub it in. Mention to Patti that the president of your college has finally resigned from the school altogether.
Yes.
And I do want to say, when I say rub it in a little bit, the last time I introduced this, it was like my school just canceled their basketball games in North Carolina because they won't fly there because of HB2.
And the ABA
your school, Patti, took how long to get rid of somebody who enabled rape?
Way too long. Way too long.
If it was 2 weeks, we'd say, okay, there's some bureaucratic stuff.
No, this is years in the making.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so glad that Ken Starr is no longer at Baylor or affiliated with Baylor. He's certainly not teaching at the law school, which was just abhorrent to me that they fired him from being chancellor, left him as president, and he was still going to teach, then took away the presidency, and he was still going to teach. He's still on campus, potentially teaching victims of rape in his classes. Can you imagine the trauma that would be of somebody who just completely ignored the law and who was supposed to be a champion of the law? It was just so.
Well, there was an article this week. There was a lot of blame the victim going on.
Oh,
because we couldn't hurt the football team. We just built that new stadium.
It's the whole thing.
I find that offensive and just disgusting.
If we took all of that outrageous money that they spend on male sports, because you certainly don't see that in women's programs, that kind of money spent, and spend it on education, imagine what our world would be like. Take it, in junior highs and high schools, especially in high schools in Texas, where they spend ungodly amounts of money on boys football, and to the detriment of all the other students.
Well,
did you see?
If they took the some of the scholarships that they give just for football and spread those around, they could give more scholarships to people who need it financially, who don't play sports.
You see one of the Olympic statistics of 63% of the medals won by women
Yes.
for the U.S.?
Yes.
So, yeah.
I was very excited that we were, kicking ass.
Yeah.
And women are the only true student athletes on campus. A lot of the football players don't graduate. A lot of the basketball players don't graduate. The girls are graduating at a much higher rate because, they don't have the multi-billion-dollar contract waiting on them when they leave. They've got to get an education. So they're the true student athletes on college campuses, and we completely ignore them, marginalize them, and allow male football players to rape them. Oh, that's real good.
And speaking about more money on campus, my school had more money. We're not flying to North Carolina. Just want to mention that.
And the NBA moved their All-Star game to New Orleans.
Yes.
Which is wonderful.
Right, and thank you to the Texas legislature for the potential of the good potential of passing some anti-gay, anti-trans laws next year, which is the reason we didn't get it here in Dallas.
Yeah, you show how scary that is for them. Is that even the mayor of San Antonio, who's been really no friend of ours, is saying that, hey, maybe we ought to rethink this. Of course, her motivation being money, not being the right thing to do, but hey, we'll take it.
Yeah.
Right. As long as we get to the same place, right?
Yeah.
Right. And the new governor of Louisiana, who's, of course, dealing with all of this incredible
floods,
devastation with the flooding and such, John Bell Edwards is a Democrat, and one of the first things he did when he came into office was to issue an executive order protecting all employees based on, all state employees based on discrimination on sexual orientation and gender identity expression. So, very excited about a governor doing the right thing for once in a state that has not done the right thing for so long.
Yeah. And the hope is that the Attorney General in North Carolina, who is running for governor, will unseat that bigoted governor. I don't know that it'll change.
Not that we endorse on this station at all, but
Roy Cooper.
It's not going to affect the election here, but anyway, it is back to school, and that was what we wanted to talk about today. Back to school for transgender people is different now than it was even 10 years ago. One reason there are just so many more who are out.
Yeah.
So what's going on? Tell us a little bit about back to school for trans kids.
Well, I think for a lot of them it can be terrifying. Also, for a lot of them, ones that are out, typically what's happening is they end up in a new school. Because if you are, say, in 4th or 5th grade and you come out as transgender, the following year when you show up for school, the kids from the previous year knew who you were, and you're probably going to get bullied more than you already were anyway. So it's a whole lot easier just to change schools. And when I say easier, it's arduous and a real traumatic thing for a kid to change schools, but it has less impact than being bullied and abused and shuffled into the wrong
So it's not a bad thing if the school system will work with you on changing your school, or does it have really negative consequences?
I mean, it can. It depends on, the community at which you are living in, because changing schools may mean nothing, because everybody in a smaller town knows everybody anyway. So the news will get to the new school, and the concern is what the administration at that school is going to do. And what's different now for a transgender child starting school, even different from last year, is that you've got a lieutenant governor and an attorney general who have essentially declared war on transgender students.
Children.
In the entire state of Texas.
Yeah. So now you've got this heightened political environment that school districts are now having to try to work with. I think the school districts, I've dealt with a lot of kids, and for the most part, the school districts have been accommodating. It's not that complicated to do, although Dan Patrick makes it seem like it's reinventing the wheel. It's really not that complicated, and for schools to be able to do it is not requiring a lot of effort. But
Fort Worth came out with new trans guidelines, trans bathroom policy guidelines, and other things. But it concentrated on the bathrooms,
of course,
because everybody's concentrating on the bathrooms. But it was really just a good common sense policy. Basically what the policy came down to was, we'll work it out with every kid. Some kids are going to want their own bathroom. Sometimes the kid doesn't want her own bathroom, and other kids don't like that kid in the bathroom, so they can have their own bathroom.
Yeah, my belief on that is, and this is just mine, but I think it's certainly reasonable, is the transgender kid shouldn't be forced into like a nurse's office or a special bathroom or anything that outs the transgender kid as being different. If they wish, say you have a trans female student, and she wishes to use the girls' bathroom, let her use the girls' bathroom. If there's someone that feels uncomfortable in the girls' bathroom, they can use the nurse's bathroom if they feel uncomfortable.
And that's exactly what Fort Worth offered
and I
to
love
everybody.
That. I love that policy because the Department of Justice and the White House have been very clear on it as far as their direction. It's just interpretation because there's no weight of law behind it. The DOJ certainly has issued an opinion. The Board of Education or Department of Education has issued an opinion. But each school district, because there is no hard and fast law, kind of has their own interpretations.
Well, and I think back to when I was in high school. At my high school, had I been out at the time, I don't know that I would have wanted to use the women's room, just the environment that we were in. So for me personally, I probably would have opted for the nurses' bathroom, the faculty bathrooms, and when I have parents ask me what sort of things do we look for in accommodations for our children, it's like, okay, if they offer you one bathroom and it's a large campus, that's not accommodating because, if the students, if all their classrooms are on the other side of the building,
you're going to be late.
You're going to be late. So they need to open up, make sure that there are bathrooms in each section of the building, particularly when that student has a lot of classes in that section of the building.
In other words, for each kid, you just have to work it out.
Yeah.
That's an example of that.
And that's not that complicated.
Because, kids, transgender kids, a lot of them just don't go because they're terrified of either one or the other. There's no good options. And for a kid to deprive themselves of water or other fluids during the day and to try and make it to the end of the day, their focus isn't on schoolwork, their focus is on making it to the bathroom, and some end up with bladder infections or other health issues. Shouldn't they just be able to focus on their schoolwork?
Well, and the other thing about using the nurse's bathroom is, if that's where sick kids go. And so if somebody has gotten sick in the nurse's bathroom, you don't get to go there. So you need alternative bathrooms to be able to do that. And there's a school in, I believe it's Colleyville. They have a transgender student. The coaches have opened up their office, and there's an extra room in the office. The students are allowed to go into that room and change, allowed to use the bathroom that is in the coach's office.
I think allowed is great. Being forced to, I wouldn't agree with it.
Okay, so you're saying, and when you hear Dan Patrick talk about it, when you hear some of these other idiots like the governor of North Carolina, like you said, because I would never say this, may he lose in November. Well, Patti, you're laughing, but you would never say that on the air either.
Oh, not me.
No. You would think this has suddenly become a huge problem.
Well, my concern...
That each and every class has 5, 10 kids that are transitioning, right? Every classroom, right? Now, what you just said was, Colleyville has a transgender student. Not every school in Colleyville, and Colleyville has a number of... Colleyville has one transgender student,
that
right?
we know of.
You're talking, 0.5% of the population, which is a very small population. But what I still...
And just 0.5% of the entire population, that doesn't mean 0.5% they're all going to come out in elementary school or even high school or even college.
But I don't understand. Well, I understand what they're saying, but I disagree with their concerns. Because when they say it's a safety issue, it is for the transgender student. It's not for the student body at large. Again, they're being in such a small minority. One kid at Colleyville High School versus the rest of the high school. I think if that one transgender kid could take on and defeat the whole high school, good luck to her or him.
And I'm using I can't remember offhand if it's Colleyville High School or one of the schools out in that section. I don't recall if it's actually Colleyville.
So Colleyville or one of the other towns in the area, they have one transgender student.
The rationale applies is that if there's somebody in danger, it's the transgender person. So when they talk about it being a safety issue, it's just a bunch of nonsense that they're putting out there.
It's fabricated fear.
When they talk about nudity, when's the last time somebody disrobed in a bathroom? You just don't see it. I've been using women's bathrooms
Josh
for
used
years
to do
and years, and I've never seen anyone else's private parts, nor have I exposed mine. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, Josh used to do that all the time.
I don't get what the concern is. I really don't.
It's what Patti was saying. It's manufacturing fear for political gain.
Yeah,
that's why Josh.
Fear.
Despicable.
That's why Josh works at KNON and not like CBS Radio.
Right.
So.
They have a LGBTQ pride-affirming school in Atlanta that just opened up, and they're catering to mostly transgender kids there, and they've given them an environment that's very warm and welcoming. And I think that type of school is great, but again, they shouldn't be forced to go there.
In a bucket.
Right. Well, we used to have the Walt Whitman School here in Dallas.
They're ignoring us.
And
we'll just have our conversation, let them have theirs.
Absolutely.
we're talking about some serious stuff here.
Well, we are too. Katie just said in this school they pee in a bucket. I want to know where they pee, because, seriously, you would think, listening to that idiot governor in North Carolina, may he lose, not that I would say that, but I believe Leslie said that, you would think this has been such a huge problem in schools.
It's not.
Well, that's why
we're talking one kid, and here in this school,
many schools there's no kids, and to get people all up in arms, like that district that is being used to file the lawsuit in Texas, I don't believe has a single transgender kid in the entire
There are 100
district.
kids in the district. 100. If it's 0.5% of the population that's transgender, that means there will be one kid every 20 years coming through that school system who's transgender. That assumes that the kid comes out when they're in school and not waiting till later, which I would think in small towns they'd be more likely to wait.
Just a legal question, would they lack standing if they don't have a transgender kid to file a lawsuit to say that this is causing a problem?
I don't know, because their lawsuit is on the interpretation of Title IX, which does apply to them. And so Title IX and what they're saying is you must have policies that allow this, and they don't want to pass the policy. And since they could potentially lose their funding, that would probably give them standing to say, hey, wait a minute, we're going to lose our funding. We don't even have any transgender kids, so we don't want to have to deal with these policies. The other thing about this lawsuit that keeps slipping notice is that Ken Paxton and his merry band of misfits were marketing to school districts. Who wants to do this for us? They were asking people to do this so that they could file their little lawsuit.
So in other words, this didn't come from the school district.
No.
And they're having a hard time finding them.
It was
They're
solicited.
shopping it around,
And the emails and the letters, several school districts got them and exposed them. So we know that they were doing this, and again, the Ken Paxton, he's trying to save himself from a little prison time.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And the other thing, too, is that with the Title IX stuff is this is like on the line for everybody.
Yeah.
Because it's an interpretation of gender in Title IX that from which, because gender is inclusive of gender identity and expression. And the interpretation that the Department of Justice has made and onward. So
We need to take a break. We're going to be talking about this for the rest of the hour. You're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink, Leslie McMurray, Katie Sprinkler, our guests, and we'll be back with more Lambda Weekly right after this.
Hey, I'm Giancarlo. You're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON FM.
And this is Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink, and we're talking transgender kids going back to school this week. I guess all kids are going back to school, but transgender kids will be among them. Our guests are Leslie McMurray and Katie Sprinkle. Just before the break, Patti, you were saying? I put her on the break.
You interrupted her, and
okay. So
I'm so back here laughing at you during the break.
Yeah, so. Patti and I are both on automatic today, so now this is just going. During the break, we were talking about a couple of lawsuits and how they would or would not pertain to the transgender community, and whether they would or would not pertain to gender identity.
Yes,
and Katie is an attorney, so let's.
The language that's been used is, and it's very famous language. It was made famous in terms of the context of a transgender person, and the EEOC Macy versus ATF, in which they jumped on some language from a Supreme Court case in which a woman was denied promotion because she wasn't dressing femininely enough. And she was actually told, if you put on a nice dress, maybe did your hair, you'd go a lot further in this company. And so she sued for sex discrimination, and the Supreme Court said, yes, She was being punished because she was not abiding by sexual stereotypes, and that is the heart of sex discrimination. So,
under that case, can a company have a dress code? Men have to wear a suit, women have to wear a dress, or is that out the window now?
potentially, it could be out the window. They can still have the dress codes, and many do. Many schools have dress codes that specifically state that you must wear undergarments that conform to your gender.
And not just undergarments, but you're talking about women must wear dresses.
Dresses and skirts. And there,
because Patti would be fired.
I wouldn't abide by it. I just wouldn't.
And again, I think that
I've never seen Patti in a dress anyway. They don't fit her.
That's not why I don't wear them.
Oh.
But if you are punished in some way because you're not complying with a sexual stereotype of women wear dresses, potentially you could sue for discrimination because, again, they're trying to force you to conform to a sexual stereotype. Now,
we call it a gender stereotype.
Yeah. I'm using the language from that they jumped on, which is the sex stereotypes. And when that gets applied, that's why Title IX is now being interpreted to include transgender people, because what they're saying is that we are deviating from this stereotype of what is a boy, what is a girl, and that is the heart of discrimination.
So let's say a company wanted to go after you for the way you dress. They can go after you because you don't dress professionally. They can't go after you because you don't personify what a woman should be. Correct. You don't.
Yeah.
But you have to be professional. So a tailored suit, a company should not object to that.
No, they should not. And if they're smart, they won't. Of course, if they're smart and they want to fire you, they just fire you and don't give you a reason.
Well, but what I'm saying is not dressing professional. Well, unless the person dresses very professionally, it's just not in a dress that somebody wants a woman.
Remember, the world's oldest profession.
I don't think they have a dress code there, though.
Let's get back to school.
And again, some of this stuff is going to filter down into schools because, again, that is the genesis of the Title IX interpretation, that you're punishing students because they're not conforming to some stereotypical notion of what sex or gender is.
Okay. I want to go back to school a little bit, and a couple of the reasons that all of a sudden this has become an issue. Trans kids have always been there. This isn't something we just invented.
A lot of it has to do with the political awakening, and we've become the flavor of the week. I mean, I think it started back when Joe Biden said that transgender rights are the next civil rights fight that's going on in this country. And so there's been an increasing amount of attention that's being focused on transgender people, and I think that's partially why. But it's an odd thing that happens. There's like this weird lag and delay when a transgender kid is introduced to a classroom situation, whether it's kindergarten or middle school, there's no problem. And then when the kids go home at night and they talk to their parents, it's not that the kids are mortified, it just might be a curiosity. It's like, how was your day? Oh, it's pretty interesting, da-da-da-da-da-da. There's a transgender kid in our class, and da-da-da-da-da. Well, then the parents get all outraged and they call the school, and it becomes parents, really, with the issue. It's not the transgender kid that caused a problem. It's not that the transgender kid isn't accepted by the other children in the class. It's that there's some parents that bought into that stigma and are hearing about it in the news.
It was the same thing with gay kids.
Yeah.
You know, how do we explain this to our to our kids that there's and I mean, my experience was
contagious?
Well, hopefully. But my experience was, had a nephew, and the nephew always expected me and my partner at the time to be together when we came over, and his mother was like, how am I supposed to explain this to them? There was nothing to explain. The kids got it. Tommy and I were together.
There you go.
Mean, what more do you need than that? You know, any more than aunt and uncle are together, uncle and uncle were together.
Let me share a quick little story. My oldest daughter, who lives in Atlanta, and she has 3 kids, and her youngest, who's age 5, is going into kindergarten. And so the kindergarten school, during the summertime, sent out this questionnaire to her, and she wanted to know everything about my granddaughter Hannah, who's 5. And it's things like things she likes, nap time, does she have a favorite stuffed animal, things that might be behavioral challenges or foods that she won't eat or whatever. And it got down to things that upset her. And that was question number 6 on there. What upsets Hannah? And my daughter wrote down 2 things. One is mashed potatoes, and she even posted a video about this. Just the mere mention of mashed potatoes.
She got very upset.
Yeah, she's crying and fussing. She just doesn't like, for whatever reason, mashed potatoes.
They're mashed.
So we don't bother her with that. But the other thing she wrote is transgender hate speech. And I thought that was a wonderful thing. Cause,
that was awesome.
Hannah, not going to put up with it, but I think it was great to send to the school and say, this is the sort of thing in our household will not be tolerated. And I thought, I couldn't love my daughter anymore. I mean, she is just the best. Loved it.
That is just I was just beaming when I saw that. And I loved all the holidays she added to that she doesn't celebrate.
Yeah.
But going back to your original question, which was, why is some of this happening?
Right.
Because both the medical community and the mental health community that have been working with the transgender community, as their influence has grown, we've begun to recognize children younger. And we've got, instead of, it's just a phase, now they seriously look into, okay, this child is saying that they're transgender. Let's explore this and investigate this. And you're right, the child is. So now those children are now able to come out at a much earlier age. When I was 5 or 6, had I come out then, and just the hint of not being masculine at 5, got the snot beat out of me by a couple of neighborhood kids. That still is probably going to happen, but now parents are recognizing, wait a minute, why is my child saying these things, doing these things? And when they seek help, they're finding help who's like, okay, you need to let the child develop and explain
this. Like the Genesis
this.
Clinic here in Dallas, here at Children's Hospital, which is fantastic. I'm so proud that we have that in Dallas.
There are only 3 of them in the country.
The things to look for with kids, is it consistent, is it insistent, and is it persistent? That's what they look for. And if
So just they want it to be persistent.
Yeah, persistent, all those things. But if it is, if they're consistent with it, if they're insistent or persistent, then you may have a kid that's transgender on your hands. You may not. But
and this goes back to some of the nonsense that the Ken Paxtons of the world, they're making it seem like when schools institute this policy, the captain of the football team suddenly going to throw on a dress and go, oh, I get to go into the bathroom. And
no, but an Olympic hero might.
Yeah, but you know what? Well, he's going to kick down the door because he had to go.
I think he's speaking of Jenner.
Oh.
Yeah.
She can do it.
Well,
but
at least
the
Jenner is consistent, insistent, and persistent.
Exactly.
It's not like a throwing on a dress to go
It's
run in
not
there.
the Mike Huckabee, I would do that to get into the girls' locker room. You know, a school district...
Well, here's what annoyed me about that one, was why didn't somebody say to him, no, if you did that, that would be illegal. You could be charged with... Voyeurism, rape even.
Yeah.
No. No.
Well, yeah, that's...
Stop showing your
happen.
ignorance
If
here.
you look at the school districts that have enacted these kind of protections, like LA Unified has had it in place for 20 years, and they've had no problems with guys deciding that they're a girl today and running in there. Because, again, the process for being transgender is spoken about with school administrators, with parents, with the kids. It's pretty much all agreed on, and that the child's going to present this way, and they should use the bathroom that they identify with. It's not something that you just decide one day.
Okay, when you say that, when you came out as transgender, you came out at what age, approximately?
You
were in your 40s.
Once and for all, I was in my 50s.
Oh, you were in your 50s, okay.
I was in my last year of high school.
So when you...
She's a slow learner.
Held back, were you?
A couple times.
So when you came out, you didn't have to get anybody's approval, agreement. You just announced it to yourself first.
Yeah.
And you might have gone through some counseling. You might have, you had to speak to your wife. You had your family to speak to. But you didn't have to go through all these things. A kid in school has to talk to teachers, administration,
Well, think
counselors.
about this, too, for a younger kid, a kid who's, preteen, maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, who's coming out. Think of the courage that it takes for a kid of that age, because you look to adults to tell you everything. Mm-hmm. What's good to eat, what's not good to eat, what's poisonous, what's hot, what's cold, what's going to hurt you, what's not going to hurt you, how to tell if a dog's dangerous. All this bit of information that's all coming in as you learn to be who you are. And this label that was hung on you by a guy who went to medical school for 12 years and has practiced medicine said, you're a little boy, but you know differently. You know that you're a little girl. But the whole world, all the adults, all the people that you would trust and think that they know better is saying that you're wrong, that no, you're a little boy. And yet you're right in standing up and telling all of them you're wrong. Mm-hmm. That's how hard it is for little kids to come out. And the ones that do, they have my admiration and respect, because that's hard to do.
And going back to your point, adults do have to go through that. They've got to go through employers and supervisors and
neighbors and community and kids and spouses.
But I mean, to start the whole thing, you can live with it yourself for as long as you want to. You might not be able to do it very publicly. Depends on your job. Depends on. And I'm not saying there aren't things you have to do. There's a lot you have to do. But I'm saying a kid can't do it.
Right. A child, particularly somebody who's 5, 6, 7, relies very heavily on their parents to handle things for them because they're just not at that point. So we really need parents to step in and say, okay, my child is verbalizing some things, let's get that checked. And then we hope those parents get educated so that they can go, okay, my child is in fact transgender, what do I need to do? And then those parents then become the advocates for the school district, for the doctor's offices, to make sure that their child is getting what they need. Because that child, if they don't have that, doesn't get any support. They get what Ken Paxton and Dan Patrick.
Yeah, a 7-year-old shouldn't have to interpret the rules and regulations of the Fort Worth policy for transgender.
Affirming care is 100% of the time the right thing to do for a transgender kid. Denying them that care, one of the gifts that it often gives them, it's hard to say, but it's an early funeral. Because a lot of these kids will feel like there's no hope and that they're being denied their identity, and they take their own lives.
And that's prevalent. Like 41% of trans people have attempted suicide at some point in their lives.
And it's 90% who have considered it.
Sure. So, and to me, it's such a miss. But by what Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton and all those like them in this country have done, is they're looking for a way to get control back and get people to conform to what their world. They want the world to be after marriage equality, after Obergefell.
You can't control someone's sexual orientation. You can't control someone's gender identity. We know who we are.
Exactly, but I think they're thinking they can lash out because we didn't see any of this until marriage equality became a reality.
Right.
It's funny.
Anywhere in the country.
We were standing on the steps out at City Hall where they had the Obergefell press conference on the day. It was June 26th, I guess it was,
last year. Yep.
And I turned to Katie and I said, today the T in LGBT stands for Target.
Yep.
That's
exactly.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is if you go to, I went to the Family Research Council's website. Because I wanted to know...
And we do want to express our sorrow that Tony Perkins lost his house in the floods.
Yeah.
And my congratulations to the flood committee. The LGBT flood committee. Well done.
Well, he said that it's God's retribution for, homosexuals. So
no, for his retribution against homosexuals. He's reading it wrong. But Eddie, we have a minute. We have to go to break.
But what was interesting, and I've lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
About the Family Research Council.
Family Research Council. Thank you. Yeah, I went to their. They don't like us very much, but I wanted to know because they're leading the charge on this anti-LGBT. They started working on their anti-trans stuff back in 2009, 2010.
Oh, sure.
So they were thinking well in advance they knew this victory was coming.
They were ready to roll it out.
And they were ready to roll it out, and they worked on it. Unfortunately, the LGBT community got a little short-sighted and thought, oh, Obergefell, we win, game over, let's go home. Not realizing that, nope, our opponents don't give up that easily, and they certainly have not.
And what is their plan for us?
Their goal, they've got a 5-step plan to legislate us out of existence.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. We're talking about trans kids going back to school with all the other kids this week. This week in Dallas, I guess school starts over the next couple of weeks here in Texas. You're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 Knon FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink, and our guests are Katie Sprinkle and Leslie McMurray. Josh, take it away.
I'm Joey Santos, and I listen to Knon FM 89.3.
And this is Lambda Weekly on 89.3 Knon FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink. And our guests are Katie and Leslie. We're talking about kids going back to school. First of all, here was part of my question before. Why all of a sudden are we seeing so many trans kids in schools? When you went to school, were there other trans kids who were out in school?
None of us were out.
No.
None of us were out. And part of that, again, is changing times, the greater recognition in the medical community, which is helping parents recognize that. And instead of punishing their child for being effeminate or masculine,
I don't have an answer for this because I'm just not sure. You knew you were transgender when you said 4.
4 going on 5.
Okay, and Leslie?
I was 5.
Okay. I think most transgender kids know that early, and I think that a lot of them even know before gay kids know that they're gay.
No, but gay kids are down in that range, 3 to 5.
Well, it's because if you're gay, it's more of a sexual orientation, who you're attracted to. But
and you might not have attraction yet at that age. Is kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, they're really not sexual beings at that point, but they have an identity. They know who they are.
Okay, I didn't know I was gay till I was a little bit older. I didn't come out till I was 19.
But that first early stage is about feelings, not about...
Yeah. I understand that.
I was also 5 or 6, and I knew I was different. That the June Ward Cleaver with Wally and the Beeve was not going to happen in my life. That's what I
the
knew.
Beeve could have happened in my life, not the Wally. It's so much.
Admit it.
Oh no, that would. Yeah. Anyway, anyway, I guess what my question is we know society would not accept this kid 20 years ago if he came out in school, but I was dumb as a kid. It never occurred to me that I shouldn't be who I am. Josh, you came out at what age? I know, when he was... Yeah, 5, something like that. Everybody knew he was gay from the minute he was born. And I'm not saying that to criticize him at all. I think that's wonderful. You should be who you are. What is it that's allowed trans kids to just say now, not just bottle it up? You knew to bottle it up for some reason.
Well, no, I was born in 1958, and there was no TV shows, there was no books, there was no movies.
So you didn't know what it was then?
Yeah, the word transgender wasn't coined until the 70s. Mm-hmm. I mean, so it wasn't even a vocabulary that I go to my mom and say, this is, I mean, kids, when I was young, you would have been institutionalized.
And the thought of, okay, I'm transgender doesn't really come to your head. It's you respond to the same things that, in my case, other girls respond to. And so I preferred playing with girls. I preferred, I identified with female characters in television shows. I often talk about the fact that, I wanted to be Batgirl. And I was playing with a couple of older kids. They were probably 6 and I was 5. And we were going to play Batman and Robin. So the oldest kid's like, well, I'm going to be Batman. The next kid was like, well, I'm going to be Robin. And I'm like, well, I'm going to be Batgirl. And these 2 kids, one of whom was actually, I considered a friend, they made fun of me and then beat the snot out of me. Wow. I mean, I was so terrified. I didn't leave the house, and I didn't think I had any friends to play with. And I didn't start going back outside until these 2 kids had moved out of the neighborhood. So... that's why, as a trans kid, I kept my mouth shut because I learned at a very young age. My dad bullied me because I was effeminate. And then I got the snot beat out of me by these two kids, one of whom I considered a friend. So the message was loud and clear. If you tell people, you get punished. And what's happened over the intervening 30, 35 years, but we'll say 15 because, I'm not that old, is that...
Leslie is.
That doesn't happen.
Oh, yeah.
At least not as prevalently as it would have in the early 70s when I was coming of age. So part of what's going on here is parents reacting different, and depending upon your neighborhood, you still may run into the two kids that I ran into, but you're not getting the total message of you will not tell anybody this.
But I think part of what you said is very true. There wasn't even a word for it before the 70s.
Yes.
No, there wasn't.
Right. And growing up, I didn't really know the word homosexual either, which was sort of coined late as well in the English vernacular.
No.
But I have to share this though really quickly. I was thrust upon with all of those stereotypes, but when it came to Barbies, my middle sister had Barbie and Ken. And so I couldn't have Barbie. There couldn't be two Barbies, right? So I had to be Midge. And Midge wasn't really allowed, I was told, wasn't allowed to have all of those little pumps and all of the clothes and everything. And I'm like, that's fine.
How about Velma and Scooby-Doo, huh?
I went to my kids because I want Midge to wear some jeans.
Well, Midge was lesbian, wasn't she?
I thought Midge was.
I thought so.
Again, going back as far as school, it was really interesting. There's an article in The Voice this week that I penned about going back for my 40th reunion, which was just a couple of weeks ago, and it was absolutely astounding, the reception that I received. It was heartwarming, it was wonderful, it was beautiful, and Katie was introduced to this girl that I used to play with from the time I was in preschool, 4 years old. She was there, and she and I were like best girlfriends back then. And turns out she came out as lesbian several years ago. So
oh, wow.
that was really cool as well. But so we've been trading emails since then. She lives in California still. But it was really nice to see her again as well.
Did anybody freak out at all, or just
no?
They rolled with it and they said, "I knew."
They didn't say they knew, but they were very affirming, and it's like, we're so glad that you're happy and living the life you want to live. It's like, how could that be any better?
That's awesome.
Yeah,
when I went back for my 20th, and I came out to my friends there, and we lived together because it was a boarding school, and they were like, "Tell us something we didn't know." Yeah. I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me then?"
You know what? When I think back to high school, there were a lot of kids that I was classmates with that we all suspected might be gay, and every last one of them ended up, But, I mean, they just didn't advertise it, but we all suspected. And now, I'm sure a lot of them thought, they probably thought I was gay. They were a little off. Had to move a couple of letters.
They're the right community.
Yeah.
So.
You have to share I found that for her. The 5-point plan.
Yes, do please.
Yeah, their 5-point plan for legislating transgender people out of existence.
From the Family Research Council.
Yeah.
Family Research Council.
The state and federal government should not allow legal gender marker corrections. There should be no legal protection against discrimination or any attempt to force others to respect the identity of a transgender person. They should not be allowed to use the facilities in accordance with their gender identities. Medical coverage should not be afforded for any transition-related care.
Do they allow it for other medical care?
Sure.
But you're saying sure.
If you got a sore throat, yeah.
What was
but you have a transgender sore throat. I don't really think they want to cover that.
The interesting thing, a lot of doctors, because we're such a curiosity, if you go in with a sore throat, they still want to see your genitalia.
Oh, I'm sure.
So, but the last one is they don't want us to be able to serve in the military.
Well, that's over.
Ship sailed.
Cross that one off because that's not going to happen.
So, but that was sort of, that's where some of this stuff is coming from, because if you can't use a public facility, if you can't use a bathroom, it's kind of hard to hold a job when you have to go home to
you
go to the
can't go
bathroom.
out to eat, you can't go shopping, and you can't travel. And that pretty much marginalizes someone being homebound or within a very small radius, and that's just wrong.
And that's what they want for us. They want us to go back into the closet.
Right.
They want us to be full of shame.
Not gonna happen.
And to be put in our place in the closet full of shame.
Never.
So that they can have the world they want. That's
Never
very
again.
rigid gender stereotypes that everyone conforms to, and they're happy because it's like, I don't know what, the 30s or the 40s, or maybe it's the 1830s or the...
Yeah, they want to live in the 1950s. The 1950s that never really existed. It
Right.
existed on Leave It to Beaver, but that's the only place it ever really existed.
They
And the
want to
same
live in
thing
a
for...
world where men are men, women are scarce, and sheep are nervous.
I think Mrs. Rayburn would have been very understanding, though, had Beaver transitioned. Before we go off on another tangent, not that we ever do that here,
Not that there's anything wrong with
and not that there's anything wrong with that, what advice do you have for parents or kids who are going to transition one way or another, because everybody does it a little bit differently? What advice do you have for them? And I'm talking about for kids that are in schools.
Well, as a parent, and talking to other parents, and knowing how I would want to be treated, is to love your kids first and foremost, more than anything else. Love your kid, love them unconditionally. And I
Okay,
think that
so
will
let's
guide-
start off with, isn't that sad that you have to tell parents to love their kid?
Well,
but,
yeah.
but it's good advice.
But I think, too often I get phone calls where I work with trans kids that have been turned out on the street.
Yeah, no,
by their parents.
I
So-
understand that. I'm saying, isn't that
It is
sad?
Yeah.
But that's where I start, is
Mm-hmm.
unconditional love for your kid, be affirming, listen to them, and respect their feelings, and just help them. That would really, I think that covers all-encompassing for them if you have somebody, whether they're trans or not, but especially if they are.
And parents need to understand that to a large degree they need to be the advocate for their child, whether their child is in elementary school, middle school, or high school, because the school discounts whatever the student says to a large degree, and so the parent has to take the lead role there. So, number one, they need to be the advocate. Number two, they need to make sure that they know what their child is going to need as the school year moves forward, because transition is not overnight. You just don't go home on a Friday afternoon, buy some new clothes, pop in on Monday, and you're done. It's a much longer process, whether you're a child, an adult. It's a very long process.
Well, the word transition implies it's something that goes on over a
Yeah,
period
do
of
some
time.
reading, educate yourself on what your kid's going to need. And the other thing, too, is, and this is kind of a fine line, and there's certainly some controversy over it, but I believe it for the right reasons, is that schools ought to have a policy of not having to inform parents if their kid wants to come out and be transgender at school, because they may get thrown out of the house. And I think it's irresponsible of the schools to out a kid at home and end up putting them in a much worse situation. I think kids sometimes are pretty good judges of their parents' reaction, and if they are allowed to be who they are at school and not have this mandatory letting the parents know, I think it should be up to the kid to inform who they want to inform on their timetable.
I had talked to a trans kid
Agreed.
in a public school here in Dallas one time, a couple of years ago. What about church on Sunday, each and every Sunday? How about, the advice that I had, go to a trans-affirming church.
Yeah, go to a trans-affirming church.
And you know what? By affirming, I mean the sermon every week shouldn't be "you're going to hell."
You're an abomination, God hates you, you mean? Like
And
that?
there are a
Yeah.
number of
Right.
churches that are
Oh, sure.
affirming for the entire LGBT community. And so, from that perspective, is the same. My advice to parents when they've got a transgender child and they need to start approaching people. Of course, if it's a church, look for a trans-affirming church. At school, you gotta have a sit down with the principal first and foremost. You need to ensure and stress upon the principal that the conversation is to be strictly confidential, because you don't need that information getting out prematurely.
It's protected information, too, under FERPA.
And how hard is it to find a trans-affirming pediatrician? Not that they're going to do any medical changes to the child, but trans-affirming, like born identified as male, transitioning to female, is going to look male in the doctor's office.
Well, I think you want a pediatric endocrinologist that can talk to them and probably have referrals that will go out from there. And I would think the Genesis Clinic could offer those.
What I recommend to people is when your child identifies as transgender, the first thing you need to find is a transgender experienced mental health provider, a counselor. Those counselors are generally going to have referrals for medical doctors. And then once you're seeing a doctor, if you're seeing a doctor for a sore throat, the fact that you're transgender makes no difference. But you need to be able to educate yourself as to, okay, I had somebody call me about their teenage transgender child, and they had gone to see a doctor, and the doctor was like, well, they're just going to have to go through puberty, and then they'll just have to go through surgery later in life. And I was like, okay, you need to change doctors, you need to change therapists. Sure enough, they changed therapists, they changed doctors. They're now in Genesis, so that doesn't have to happen. So there are a lot of doctors, and Leslie and I have both spoken to UT Southwest. This is not a topic that's being taught in medical school. So there are a lot of doctors out there.
No. Every doctor I've spoken to has said they've had at least 15 minutes of education.
So,
at least 15 minutes.
And I was responsible for 8 minutes of that, and she took the rest.
We are almost out of time, and this is one of those going off on a tangent. Funeral home, Detroit.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah, there was recently a funeral home that had fired a transgender employee. It was a male to female. She announced an intent to transition to female, and within 2 weeks she was terminated for being transgender by the funeral home. That was taken to court. The ACLU filed a lawsuit. I believe there were some others that piled on as well. And it was recently decided in favor of the funeral home, and the basis for that was ignoring the Price Waterhouse versus Cooper, which is the one that talked about stereotypes. Instead, it bent more towards Hobby Lobby, saying the religious beliefs, the closely held religious beliefs of the funeral home operator trumped the civil rights of the transgender person. Therefore, her termination has been upheld. I expect the ACLU to file an appeal in this.
On what grounds, though? On the grounds of
civil rights, and that in fact...
No, not for the appeal. On what grounds did the court...
The court, because of Hobby Lobby.
Because of religious belief.
Belief.
Okay.
Trumped the civil rights of the transgender
And
person.
were they worried about offending the corpses?
Predicted
Apparently
when the
so.
Hobby Lobby decision was handed down. In her dissent, she said that she feared that this would be religious freedom run amok, and that it would be denying people their civil rights, and we're seeing exactly that happen. And this is a really scary time to be alive that this thing is upheld.
I agree. And license to discriminate laws such as HB2 in North Carolina need to go. There needs to be a defendant. They need to lose in the court system all the way up.
And there needs to be a price paid for that.
This will change our country for the absolute worst for all time. If
religious freedom is
law.
that you get to attend the church of your choice, you get to read the Bible of your choice, your religious practices are of your choice. You can't be forced to do that. It's not that you get to force the rest of the world to avoid offending your religious beliefs. That's not how it works, but that's how the politicians that want a theocracy in this country, like the Dan Patricks of the world, see it. It's not about our religious freedom. It's about Dan Patrick's. It's about Ken Paxton's.
Right.
And Ken Paxton doesn't really believe any of this stuff. He's just, political whore trying to stay out of federal prison.
Oh, come on. If you want to see him pray, you wait till that jury goes out. You want to see him praying like there's no tomorrow.
But it was no different than, like, say my religion says I'm allowed to punch the air. But when that punch hits my nose, that's when it's no longer your religious freedom.
Yeah.
So.
Leslie, Katie, I want to thank you both for being here. Come back again. I'm sure
You'll have another pledge drive soon?
We'll have another pledge drive. So actually, and I do want to remind people, pledge drive, we didn't do pledge drive today because we collected for the station the amount that we needed to collect.
Yay!
Our show, though, is a couple $100 short of our goal. So if you would like to make a pledge, go to knon.org. click on the pledge button and just make a pledge. Help us get to our goal, because it's not just the station that needs to get to its goal. It's each show, and that is what indicates which shows are going to continue. After 33 years, we'd like to keep going on the air. But that's how they decide which stations come, or which shows come and go on the station. For all of us here at Lambda Weekly, have a good week.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.